My mother and Aunt Evelyn served the meal. 3 courses, followed by a marble cake freshly baked in our oven that afternoon. We ate off the good dishes with the good silverware, and in the dining room, no less, where we had our best rug, and our best furniture, and our best linens, and where we ourselves ate only on special occasions. From my side of the table you could see the photographic portraits of the family dead, arranged atop the atop the break front that was our memorial shrine. Framed there were 2 grandfathers, our maternal grandmother, a maternal aunt, and 2 uncles. One of them, Uncle Jack, Alvin's father and my father's beloved older brother. In the aftermath of Rabbi Bengelsdorf's invoking Lindbergh's name, I was more confused than ever. A rabbi was a rabbi, but Alvin, meanwhile, was in a Canadian Army hospital in Montreal, learning to walk on an artificial leg after having lost his own leg battling Hitler. And in my own house, where I was supposed to wear anything except my good clothes, I had to put on my one tie and my one jacket to impress the very rabbi who helped to elect the president whose friend was Hitler. How could I not be confused when our disgrace and our glory were one and the same? Something essential had been destroyed and lost. We were being coerced to be other than the Americans we were, and yet, by the light of the cut-glass chandelier, amid the weighty dark-stained suite of dining-room furniture, we were eating my mother's pot roast in the company of the first famous visitor we had ever entertained. To further confound me and make me pay the full price for my thoughts, Bengelsdorf began all at once to speak about Alvin, who he'd learned about from my Aunt Evelyn. "I'm saddened by the casualty in your family. My heart goes out to all of you. Evelyn tells me that when your nephew is released from the hospital, he will come to convalesce with you all. I'm sure you know the mental anguish that such a wound can provoke in someone still in the flower of his youth. It will require all the love and patience you can muster to bring him to where he can again resume a useful life. His story is particularly tragic because there was no necessity whatsoever for his having crossed over to Canada to join their armed forces. Alvin Roth was born a citizen of the United States, and the United States is not at war with anyone, has no intention of going to war with anyone, and doesn't require the sacrifice of life or limb in warfare from a single one of its young men. Some of us have gone to great lengths to make this so. I've encountered considerable hostility from members of the Jewish community for allying myself in the 1940 election with the Lindbergh campaign, but I have been sustained by my abhorrence of war. It is terrible enough that young Alvin should have lost his leg in a battle on a European continent, having nothing to do with the security of America or the well-being of Americans." As he went on, more or less repeating what he'd said at Madison Square Garden in support of America's remaining neutral. Or on he went, more or less repeating what he'd said at Madison Square Garden in support of America's remaining neutral, but my focus was now only on Alvin. He was coming to stay with us? I looked at my mother. She'd told us nothing about it. When would he arrive? Where would he sleep? It was bad enough, as my mother said, in Washington, that we weren't living in a normal country. Now we would never again be living in a normal house. A life of even more suffering was taking shape around me, and I wanted to scream, "No! Alvin can't stay here. He has only one leg." I was so upset that it was a while before I realized that the dining room reign of decorum had ended, and my father was no longer allowing himself to be shoved aside. Somehow he had managed at last to overturn the obstacles posed by Bengelsdorf's credentials, and by his own insufficiencies. He had caused being intimidated by the rabbinical grandeur, and he had ceased being intimidated by the rabbinical grandeur, and urged on his irrepressible sense of an impending disaster, and violently irritated by the condescension he was letting Bengelsdorf have it, pince-nez and all. "Hitler," I heard him saying, "Hitler is not business as usual, Rabbi. This madman is making a war from 1,000 years ago. He is making a war such as no one has ever seen on this planet. He has conquered Europe. He is at war with Russia. Every night he bombs London into rubble and kills hundreds of innocent British civilians. He is the worst anti-Semite in history, and yet his great friend, our president, takes him at his word when Hitler tells him that they have an understanding. Hitler had an understanding with the Russians. Did he keep it? He had an understanding with Chamberlain. Did he keep it? Hitler's goal is to conquer the world, and that includes the United States of America, and since everywhere he goes he shoots the Jews, when the time is right, he will come and shoot the Jews here. And what will our president do then? Protect us? Defend us? Our president will not lift a finger. That is an understanding. That is the understanding that they reached in Iceland, and any adult who thinks otherwise is crazy. Rabbi Bengelsdorf showed no impatience with my father, but listened respectfully, as if in sympathy with at least some of what he was hearing. Only Sandy seemed to be having trouble keeping his feelings to himself, and when our father referred scornfully to Lindbergh as our president, he turned to me and made a face that revealed how far he'd spun out of the family orbit, merely by making the ordinary American's adjustment to the new administration. My mother was seated at my father's right, and when he had finished, gripped his hand in hers, though to communicate how proud she was of him or to signal him to be still wasn't clear. As for Aunt Evelyn, she took all her cues from the rabbi, concealing her thoughts behind a mask of benign sufferance, while her shallow brother-in-law dared to oppose, with his piddling vocabulary, a scholar who could talk in 10 languages. Bengelsdorf did not immediately respond, but instead created a portentous interval in which, quietly to insert his rejoinder, "I was at the White House talking to the President just yesterday morning." He sipped from his glass of water, allowing time for us to regain self-possession. "I was congratulating him," he continued, "on the significant inroad he had made into allaying the Jewish suspicions that dated back to his trips to Germany in the late 30s, when he was secretly taking the measure of the German Air Force for the U.S. government. I informed him that any number of my own congregants who had voted for Roosevelt were now his strong supporters, grateful that he had established our neutrality and spared our country the agonies of yet another great war. I told him that just folks and programs like it were beginning to convince the Jews of America that he is anything but their enemy. Admittedly, before his becoming president, he at times made public statements grounded in anti-Semitic cliches, but he spoke from ignorance then, and admits as much today. I'm pleased to tell you that it took no more than 2 or 3 sessions alone with the president to get him to relinquish his misconceptions, and to appreciate the manifold nature of Jewish life in America. This is not an evil man, not in any way. This is a man of enormous native intelligence and great probity, who is rightly celebrated for his personal courage, and who wants now to enlist my aid to help him raise those barriers of ignorance that separate Christian from Jew and Jew from Christian, because there is ignorance as well among Jews, unfortunately, many of whom persist in thinking President Lindbergh is an American Hitler when they know full well that he is not a dictator who attained power in a putsch, but a democratic